All right, and welcome back to another episode of Who's Lifting Today. I'm here with Haley Hines. Haley Hines is a certified health and wellness coach, intuitive eating counselor, personal trainer, and health education specialist, and also the host of the Give 'em the Bird podcast, where she aims to challenge what it means to be healthy and fit and gives the bird to the diet industry and societal expectations of body size. Haley, that's a lot of credentials.
Oh my gosh, I'm so qualified.
That is all the things. I am super excited to have this conversation with you. We're going to kind of talk about like moving away from the weight on the scale. You clearly know a lot about it, just from like your intro there. The first question I want to ask is, why should we move away from the weight on the scale? Why isn't it something that we should have as part of our training?
Yeah. I think the big thing that comes up for me when I think about using weight like as a measure of progress or to like tell us how well we're doing with our training, it's really just not reliable. You know, there's so many things that impact the number on the scale. I always talk to people about, our body is like 60% water, and so many different things can impact how much water we've retained or how much water we've released, right? So eating a salty meal, or if you're someone who menstruates, like what time of the month it is for you, even things like how much sleep you've gotten or how stressed you are. Even if like you're, strength training a lot and you're weighing yourself after your workout, ironically, you're probably going to see an increase in your weight unless you're sweating a ton during your strength training workout, which hopefully you're not. So it's just really not reliable because it's so variable in nature. And I think because it's so variable, it can be really hard to stay motivated when we're using that as like our measurement of progress, because we have this goal, we're strength training, we're probably getting stronger, we're getting more confident in the gym, we're feeling good. But then we step on the scale and we're like, oh, but I'm not seeing any quote unquote progress. Like the scale didn't go down. And so we feel like we did all of that for nothing, when really we have all these other amazing things that have happened for us. But when we're basing so much of our progress on that number, it feels like crap, And then I think too, the other piece of it, which I really focus on my podcast and with the people that I meet with, is it can really lead to an unhealthy relationship with exercise and with movement. Again, if the scale is our main source of measuring progress, a lot of times we will do whatever it takes to see that measurement improve, right? Or that progress improve. And that can mean participating in exercise we don't necessarily enjoy, but that we think is the most effective. It can mean exercising or moving regardless of injury or illness. And then it can also even tie into the food, like then feeling guilty for eating certain foods, or feeling like, oh, because I ate this, I need to exercise so much more. And that's just really not healthy. And it can create this like negative association between you and movement. So I would say those are the big things. The biggest being it's just so variable and unreliable, but it's not good for our motivation, and it can lead to an unhealthy relationship with exercise, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Now, I've heard people say like, because it's so variable, the solution to that is to weigh yourself every day and then like kind of take averages. Like that's kind of the solution because it is so variable. Is that something that you would recommend, or do you see problems with that as well?
Yeah, I definitely see problems with that. Like, again, we can fluctuate not only day to day and week to week and month to month for no reason other than just, our biology, but even like hour by hour, our weight fluctuates. And again, I think it's also like, it's putting so much emphasis and importance on this device to tell us like how we're doing. I think with some people who, if they're coming to me and they are weighing themselves daily, and it is a harmful relationship that they have with that number, because let's be real, some people can step on the scale, see that they've gained weight, and they're like, I don't really give a shit,
They just move on.
Yeah, they just move on. So I think that's important to note. But for a lot of people, if they come to me and they're weighing themselves every single day, there are ways that we can modify that behavior and that relationship with the scale without me just telling them to cut it cold turkey, right? Because this is like a habit, it's a behavior that they formed. So I think if anything, it's like pick the same day of the week, same time, like first thing in the morning, if you're going to. But even then, that still has so much
There's still
variability
challenges
behind it. Yeah. So I think there's a way you can like scale back your use of the scale, just like you would with anything that's not serving you, whether it's, smoking or whatever it might be, and we can scale back those behaviors and eventually stop using them. That way we can listen to our body a little bit better. I think that's typically my recommendation for people who are doing it every single day.
For sure. Yeah. When you say poor relationship with the weight on the scale, can you like elaborate on like what that might look like? And I think like the other question that I have as well, feel free to answer them together or separately, is if we're not focusing on the weight on the scale, what are we focusing on instead?
Yeah. To me, a poor relationship with the number on the scale or with our weight in general, right? It's like basing our worth on that number. And I know that we could obviously, our worth can be so many different things, but it's thinking that we are more capable, we're, more worthy, we're going to be more attractive, more XYZ if we lose weight. And so specifically what it looks like beyond just like our worth hinging on it, feeling like if that number does go up, that, that week of exercise was worthless, right? Or making then, like if we see a higher number on the scale, making adjustments to our eating or maybe our movement because of it. So whether that leads to like eating less or some sort of restriction or exercising more. So I think it's just like really basing our behaviors on that and feeling like, I think too, if we get a lot of anxiety at the thought of not weighing ourselves, like, well, how am I supposed to know, where I'm at? And so I think if that anxiety is coming up and then those like trickle down behaviors with our movement and our food and maybe other areas of life are coming into play, that's like a huge indicator to me, like, ooh, we may not be in the best, relationship with the scale.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I was going to say like, so it's just like when the weight on the scale, affects you emotionally or mentally, or kind of like it's going to create negative behavior beliefs, or maybe you don't feel like your training is worth it because you didn't lose as much weight as you were expecting. Those are kind of things that like maybe the weight on the scale isn't right for you, as like kind of an example. Now you kind of mentioned like you can slowly move away from the weight on the scale. What is like a tip that you would have for someone who like weighs themselves daily currently and it's like it's not going well, but they feel like they have to? What would what's like a good first step you would recommend to someone like that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would recommend, if they feel like they're at a place where they can, stop weighing themselves as frequently, awesome, let's do that. But also I think another thing that they can do is, and it kind of gets to your second question you had, was finding other ways to measure their progress. So sure, if you want to continue to track your weight for now, that's fine. We will try to, scale back from that eventually. But what are some additional ways that you can track if you're improving your fitness, or just, if your strength training is having an impact on you? So that could be like objective measures or also subjective measures. So those objective measures could be things like being able to lift heavier weight or run, a mile in a faster time. Being able to like improve your form, being better at your form when it comes to weightlifting. That's huge. And that has a big impact when it comes to, getting stronger. I also think things like, and this is somewhat subjective too, feeling more comfortable in a gym or with the weights. I think that's like comfortability is huge. Consistency. Are you seeing improvements in like your consistency, enjoyment? Are you actually looking
Do you actually
forward?
like training? Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you started feeling like really timid and not being comfortable and confident, and now it's like, oh, I'm excited to go train after work. Like, hallelujah. That is so amazing. Right. And I know that you're probably
That's huge.
like,
yeah.
oh, that is like, we're talking quality of life, And we also see, like, I work with a lot of people who are wanting to get active for their mental health. And so then our measurements of progress could be general happiness. It could also be, fill in the blank, whatever that concern is, whether it's mood swings or just low mood, low motivation, anxiety, stress. Are we seeing improvements in those things? So I think that would actually be the first step that I would take with someone if they're not ready to stop weighing themselves as frequently. It would be, okay, you can continue to weigh yourself. And if you want to continue using that as a progress point, cool. And let's find all these other things that we can measure our progress based on. And And hopefully that way, if they do step on the scale and the number's not where they want it to be, they can then at least reflect back and say, okay, before I stepped on the scale, how was I feeling about my training? What other, how are my other progress points doing? So I think finding other ways to measure progress is like a huge factor when it comes to stepping away from
you
the
have to
scale.
shift the focus essentially. Like
Yes.
It's kind of like, well, if I'm not training for the weight on the scale, I have to train for something. Right. And I think like that's good messaging, because I don't think that's always said online with people who talk about removing the weight on the scale. There's a lot of talk about like not training for the weight on the scale, and that's fine. And that can be part of the conversation. I think that's great. But if you don't replace it with anything, then we have people who go from training for the weight on the scale to never training again.
Yeah.
And like that's also problematic, because regardless of like what your goal is, we still want you training. So I think it's good to create some other goals. I definitely focus on strength, or like I guess performance, as part of like as a replacement, because I think a lot of the things that you want from weight loss training actually come from strength training in like a more like sustainable way. So I appreciate you like giving some like, well, here's other things that you can focus on instead. And I just want to add to that as well, is that whatever you decide to focus on has to be your choice. Because we can't tell you like, hey, you know what you should go for is like your first pull-up. As that, like, if you don't care about pull-ups, then like it's just like a not motivational goal. So I think that's like a good caveat to make there, is that like at the end of the day, like you have to pick your journey if it's not going to be weight loss. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it's so different people to people, or person to person. The person that I just got done meeting with, she's a full-time student and she's also a mom. And so her goals right now are really related to being able to like keep up with her, I think she's 4 years old, her 4-year-old daughter, or, being able to get up off the floor or pick her daughter up off the floor and not notice like straining in her back and everything. So compare that to, a college age student and what their goals might be. Maybe we're thinking of improvements in confidence, or concentration, or decreases in stress too, So yeah, I think it has to be something that's specific for you, and something that you like. I think, we hear a lot about like your why and it's kind of overused, but I do think that, our why has to be something so specific to us, and it has to be intrinsic. We know that if we're intrinsically motivated to do something, we're far more likely to achieve it than if we're extrinsically motivated. And that extrinsic motivation could be because a doctor said, hey, you need to exercise to lose weight, or, you want, just even wanting to lose weight is an extrinsic motivator because we're wanting to change the size and shape of our body. Now, if you say, well, I want to lose weight because I want to lower my risk for heart disease, well, then your motivation isn't losing weight. Your motivation then is lowering your risk for heart disease, right? And we can achieve that without weight loss. So yeah, I think focusing on the intrinsic motivators and making sure they're specific to you, super important. So I definitely agree with what you said.
Yeah. What is the reason behind your training? Are you trying to feel more confident? Are you trying to feel better in your own skin? Or is it like for health reasons? And, we've talked about this where training for the weight on the scale doesn't like always do that. Or at like a minimum, you don't have to focus on, you talked about heart disease, where like we can improve that whether the weight on the scale changes or not. And one thing that I think like, I always like to make this point clear is that we're not saying losing weight is bad in and of itself. Is that what we're saying is that losing weight is just not the primary focus, and that we want you to have like healthy, sustainable habits. We want you to exercise, and then like the weight on the scale will be what it is, if that makes sense. It's kind of like habits first, and then, whatever your weight is going to be whatever your weight is, and that we don't predetermine that it's a lower or higher weight. And I'm sure you agree with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I care way more about somebody's health promoting behaviors than I care about their weight. But at the same time, I don't believe that weight loss is inherently bad, right? It's just the ways that we oftentimes go about it and the reasons for why we want to lose weight that may not be the healthiest.
Right. And there are, exactly. And there are ways that you can lower your weight in like a lot of ways. But is it like a good decision? Is it like healthier? I think is also something that's worth noting, is that if your focus is just the weight on the scale, Well, there's lots of ways that you can like lose weight that are a terrible idea.
Yes, not healthy at all.
Not healthy at all. Like it's, we can talk about things like 1200 calorie diet. So we can talk about like never eating carbs again, or we can talk about like removing, full food groups or claiming other foods are good and bad. These are all things that like might be able to help you lose weight, at least in the short term. Are they like a good idea to do? Absolutely not. Like, I think that's, yeah.
If your goal is to improve your health, absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless for like a chronic health, condition like allergy or something like that.
Very specific to the individual at that point.
Yeah.
No, that's totally fair. Now, I think one thing that comes up a lot is that, so let's say you're convinced, okay, like I'm moving away from the weight on the scale. I'm done with this thing. Throw it out or like put it to the side, whatever it might be. A lot of people, your friends and family, are not going to be on board. I will even point out that like my own family is not on board with this like kind of mentality. Like I'm my parents noticed that I like lost 10 pounds and they were telling me what a great job I did, despite like my job being totally not about the weight on the scale at all. How do you help people stay on track with that goal when like maybe the community or relationships around them aren't as aligned?
Yeah. This is such a good question because when we look at like the larger, broader society, most people are still in this mentality of losing weight equals healthier and, stuck in the idea of BMI and all of that. So it can be hard the chances of being surrounded by people who don't have that mentality are lower. If you are someone who has those people around you, yay, hold them tight. Don't let them out of your
But
your sight.
We're the weird ones.
Yeah,
that's
we're the outcasts.
We're the outcast. Yeah. I think it's like
story of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the first thing I would say is, you mentioned community in there. I think finding some sort of community that talks about what we're talking about, like weight neutral, or even if it's just like a community that talks about like women and weightlifting, right? Like sometimes they don't even bring up the idea of weight loss at all or any sort of weight, but just empowering women to lift weights. I think finding some sort of community is huge. If that can be in person, amen. That's amazing. And I know that, some of those groups might exist. You could search like your Facebook to see if there's any like in the surrounding area. Or even I think community can be found, again, ideally it's if it's in person, but even on the interwebs, right? Like on Instagram, can you curate your feed in a way that you feel in community with people who are spreading messages, Mark, like you and I, or, things that are empowering you to step away from the scale? Because every time you pick up your phone and you scroll through, if you are getting that exact same message of, your health is equivalent to your weight and all of that, it's just going to pull you back to the scale. So I think the community piece of it is really good. The other thing I would say is find some way that you can, I don't want to say talk back to, but you can just like let people know that that's no longer your intention to like move for weight loss. So whether that's, you mentioned like with your parents, when they mention something to you, can you say like, oh yeah, I'm not sure how that happened. I'm really focusing on gaining strength right now. And I guess the weight just kind of came off with it, trying to show that I've changed my intention behind it. I have done this so much personally in the last like 2 years, and it is wild how saying one line like that, it gets everybody around you to think differently. I mean, not necessarily all the time, and it's just a respectful way, to go about it by like honoring your body. Just saying like, oh yeah, I don't really care too much about the weight anymore. I'm really focusing on like getting stronger or just improving my mental health or my quality of life. So I think finding like a go-to line, to ease it into a conversation when the talk of weight loss or dieting or our bodies comes up, and being able to see like the trickle down effect. It's wild. Like now all of my friends and my colleagues, we have these conversations all the time because we've shifted our attitudes around it. And it all started with just one person bringing up like, you know what, I think I'm going to be done weighing myself. And it kind of spirals from there. So that would be my two things: community, and then letting your intentions be known with the folks around you. And also being okay with, you might share with them, I'm no longer weighing myself, you say it in a respectful way. your friends, your family, they might still step on the scale, and that's okay. And I think it's just recognizing that we are all on a different kind of health journey, and health and well-being means something different to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully somewhere down the line, they will decide to stop using the scale. But being okay with, you having a different perspective on it than they do, and still being able to be in conversation and, community with that person.
Yeah. And you don't have to be combative about it, which I think is like what you mentioned. Like, it's not your job to like make everyone weight neutral. Okay. Like,
yes.
It's not your focus. That's,
that's way too much pressure on one person.
That's way too much pressure. Yeah, absolutely. But like, you can just mention like, hey, I'm actually just like not focusing on the weight on the scale anymore. Like, I'm really just focused on like getting stronger and like having like healthier habits. And I think like, I've done that in my life, and people are like, oh, okay. Like, for the most part, like, or maybe they are a little confused, but they don't, people don't want to be like super combative back.
Right.
That makes sense. So I think it's like, as long as you're not saying like, well, actually I'm on a better path than you.
Yeah.
Is like,
I am better than you.
I am doing the right training is not the like, so as long as you're not going that route, at the end of the day, we want you to like lose your friends in the process here. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's not the way it's going to be as well. You mentioned the BMI is not like as helpful as would like it to be. Can you like elaborate more on why, like, because it's used a lot, like it's used in doctors, it's used, people look up the BMIs online. Like why is BMI not something we should focus on?
Yeah. I mean, you can even look back at like the history of how BMI was created, who created it. It was created by a mathematician many, many moons ago.
I think it was like 1800s, something like that.
It was like a long
time ago. Yeah.
It was a while back. Yeah. And, it's used now for like population health. You look at a certain population and determine like what, where is this population at in regards to their weight, to their height ratio. But the problem is that it is just that it is a ratio of our height to weight. So you could be someone who is like super short. We'll say like, I don't even know what short is to people now, 4'8". That's very short.
Pretty short. Yeah.
That's pretty short. We'll say 5 foot. You can be 5 foot and you could just be like a brick house, like so solid with muscle. I think about like wrestlers, for example. A lot of times I'll use that as an example. And, but BMI is going to tell you that you're either overweight or obese because you were short, but your weight is high because you have so much muscle. So it doesn't take into account our muscle mass. It doesn't take into account, all the other, our fat-free mass, any of that. So that is why BMI is problematic. And another thing that it can do too is that if, people go to the doctor for an issue that they're experiencing, a lot of times these people, if they fall into that overweight or obese category, their issues get dismissed. And we've seen like the really, terrible examples of that, like cancers go undiagnosed or, other medical conditions. So I have a friend who's a pediatrician, and I had her on my podcast and we talked about it. And she was like, it's hard because in the medical community, like that's all we have right now. It's really difficult. So I think like her perspective was I use it and I also counsel my patients and let them know that this is just one way that we can see where you're at in regards to like your biometrics, quote unquote. But it's not the end all be all. So again, it doesn't take into account the whole person.
There's like too many factors to health to just do like height and weight. And I think like that's like
it oversimplifies it.
It oversimplifies, especially at the individual. I wish it would be great if it did work, because it's like so low cost and it's so like it's so easy to implement, and there's just like problems that exist. Even just like you were kind of talking about, like people are just built different, not even on muscle mass, but just like if you're a person with like naturally wider hips or naturally broader shoulders, like you are probably going to be higher just because of like your build. And that like being, maybe you should be in the overweight category as like kind of an example. Those are going to be things that like people are just built, like people are built different. Like that's, I think, is like a huge factor. Men and women are built different, but we both use the same BMI scale. Kids are really tough as well, because kids grow really weird, where like it'll be like a year and they'll gain like a foot and 30 pounds. Or it'll be
how weird is it that, for one, I think having like standards for children is just like bananas. I've heard like horror stories from my friends who are moms who take their, their kid in for a 6-month appointment and they're like, she's a little overweight. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? My baby is growing. But it's so ironic that we like praise weight gain, when kids are young, a lot of times.
Yeah, like the chubby baby.
Yeah,
that's
or
like the
they're
goal.
going through a growth spurt. They gained, so much, this many inches and whatever. But then like once we hit a certain point, it's like, oh no, you're gaining weight. This is bad. So yeah, it's the irony. And yeah, I like what you mentioned too about people are built differently. Because I even think about, going back to this idea of our weight and our body size does not determine like our athleticism, our performance, our health. I think about like Sarah Robles, who is an Olympic weightlifter. And I mean, if you were to see her on the street by, society's standards, she would probably be deemed obese and unhealthy and all the other things that come with living in a larger body. But she is a badass Olympic weightlifter.
But she literally competes at the Olympic level. She is fitter than all of us. Okay? Yeah. Like by all standards, I think is like that actually matter. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if we only based her health on, BMI, it would be like, wow, that is just so wild to think about it like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like if people are going to use BMI, I think at a minimum, BMI should be one of those things that's like, okay, BMI is high. Let's check some stuff to verify would be like the minimum. And then at most, we should live in a world where like we just measure things directly. Whereas opposed to like, like BMI, if your BMI is high, that means you like might have, hypertension. Well, like, why don't we just check that directly?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why don't we just go to the source? Like we don't need to guess via BMI. Like we can just check that right out of the gate. And I think like that's something that's like something worthwhile for people trying to move away from the weight on the scale. As like a last question, where can, what's your tip for moving away? I know I kind of answered this earlier, but for people who want to move away from the weight on the scale, they're convinced we did it. What are we going to do? Like, how do we start that journey?
Yeah, again, I would say find other ways to measure your progress. So again, check into those like objective measures, similar to how we use like weight as an objective measure. What are other ways that you can objectively measure your progress? Whether, it's how much weight you've lifted, like with strength training, or, your performance metrics. And then also check into those subjective measures too. So how are you feeling, your confidence, your mental well-being, all those other things, your comfortability with the gym, consistency, finding movement you enjoy, etc. So I think that is the first step. And then if people still feel like that tug to step on the scale, can you at least decrease how often you're stepping on it? Going from daily to maybe 2 times a week, or going from daily to weekly, etc. Yeah,
slowly move it out. That makes sense. Is the podcast the best place where people can find you?
It sure is. Yes.
Okay. The Give 'Em the Bird podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, all the big places, I'm assuming.
Yeah, all the places.
Okay. I was on the podcast as well there. So definitely check out that episode. She has a great podcast. Highly recommend. Haley, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much. This was fun.
All right. And thank you for listening to another episode of Who's Lifting Today?